Good morning, everyone. Happy Friday morning to you, and welcome back to Morning Musings. My name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute of Ardmore, Oklahoma. This is video number 3 in our continuing review, response, and refutation of Brock Hollett's book entitled Debunking Preterism. I want to thank you so very, very much, for your wonderful comments and response to this series of videos so far. We're just now kind of getting into the book, but Mr. Hollett begins his book by an outright denial, basically, that the Bible can mean what it says. He acknowledges that the time statements of the Bible indicate that the coming of the Lord was at hand. He admits that's what those words mean. At hand means at hand, quickly, shortly. All of those words indicate imminence. But then, of course, he sets out to prove that it couldn't really mean that, and that the New Testament writers simply did not understand. That's right. He accuses the New Testament writers of not understanding that while they were directed by the Holy Spirit to use words of imminence, that there was supposed to be a so far 2,000-year gap, delay, postponement in the actual fulfillment of the words that he gave them to use. Now, he understands, Brock Hollett understands, there's a problem with time. He says on page 17, the modern reader of the Apocalypse, and I would add of the entire New Testament, faces the challenge of reconciling the time statements with an apparent delay in the Lord's coming. Well, he is absolutely correct. Scholars have struggled with this, so he says, theologians often call this dilemma, quote, the problem of a delayed parousia, unquote. Look, folks, it's a problem. But once again, Brock Hollett sets out to say, well, it's not really a problem. It's just that the words make it sound like there's a problem. Well, if the words make it sound like there's a problem, then there's a problem. Perhaps it is preconceived ideas about the nature of the coming of the Lord that has caused Mr. Hollett to turn his back on all of these time statements and to say, well, of course, they do indicate imminence, but we have to understand that that imminence will only be true when it finally takes place. 2 or 3 or 4 or 5,000 years or 1,000,000 years or whatever that is. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a horrible abuse of language. Now, Mr. Hollett then appeals, as virtually everyone does, to what Peter said in 2 Peter chapter 3. Do not be mindful of the fact that one day is with the Lord as 1,000 years, and 1,000 years as a day. And he said, and he tells us, the apostle responded to the charge of the skeptics by explaining that the apparent, in italics, the apparent failure of Jesus to return quickly is not an actual failure to faithfully keep his promises. Furthermore, the fact that he did not return immediately does not indicate a failure to return soon. The apostle affirmed that the Lord is not slow, as some count slow. I'm sorry, this is awful. I certainly don't mean to be disrespectful to Brock Hollett, but this is awful. Now, this is an apparent delay. But the writer of Hebrews says, Hebrews chapter 10 verse 37, now the one who is coming will come in a very, very little while. Watch this, catch the power of it, and will not delay. Will not delay. Brock Hollett wants us to understand, well, 2,000 years is not a delay. If we understand that one day is with the Lord 1,000 years, wait a minute. 1,000 years is as a day. when Peter used that language, one day is with the Lord 1,000 years, and 1,000 years is as a day, it's critical to understand he did not say a day is 1,000 years. You see, he's using a metaphor. And what's critical to see, he is quoting directly from Psalms chapter 90 and verse 4. Brock Hollett would have us to understand that Peter was telling his audience, now look, I know that the language sounds like the coming of the Lord is at hand, but you have to understand that God doesn't tell time like we do. God cannot tell time as we do. And he cites Psalms 90. That is an overt abuse of Psalms chapter 90. You need to go back and read the chapter. Psalms chapter 90 is an affirmation of the faithfulness of God to keep His promises. If God said something was far off, oh, by the way, He did at times. If God said something was far off, guess what? It was far off. It was not near. It was not imminent. But if God said something was at hand, guess what? It was at hand. And I must take note of the fact that Mr. Hollett plays a word game here. Did you notice what he says about the immediate? Yeah, the fact that he did not return immediately does not indicate a failure to return soon. In the Greek, there is a word for immediately, parakrema. In the first century, the Jews thought the kingdom was coming immediately. Jesus said, no, that's not right, because the Son of Man must go into a far country there to receive a kingdom and to return. Jesus himself rejected the idea of an immediate return, but he affirmed his first century return, Matthew 24, 29 to 31. So when Mr. Hollett focuses on immediately versus soon, that is a contrast that Jesus himself used. The bottom line is that any appeal to 2 Peter chapter 3 to attempt to explain away the time statements is an abuse of Peter's point. Peter's point was the scoffers are saying, look how long it's been. Look how long it's been. And Peter said, the passing of time does not affect God's ability, nor His affirmation that He will fulfill His word on time. In closing this morning, let me ask that you consider this. If Peter in 2 Peter chapter 3 was denying the objective imminence of language, then he was denying his own words. In 2 Peter chapter 3, 1 and 2, Peter said, this second epistle I write unto you, brethren, in both of which to stir up your holy minds by way of remembrance of all that has been spoken by the holy prophets and by Jesus and by his apostles. Now what are you saying, Peter? Peter said, well, this is the second epistle I'm writing unto you to remind you about what the Lord said and about what the other apostles have said. Okay, what did Peter say in the first epistle? I mean, after all, 2 Peter is the second one. What did he say in the first epistle about the coming of the Lord? 1 Peter chapter 1, 5 and following, he said Jesus was ready to be revealed. The Greek word ready is from hetoimos, which carries with it a dual meaning. Morally prepared and temporally prepared. Temporally ready. Ready to be revealed in the last times. Okay, Peter said Christ had been revealed in regard to his incarnation in the last time. So the incarnation was in the last days, which means it wasn't in the Christian age, folks. It was in the last days of the Old Covenant age. That's the definition of the last times. Okay, Christ's parousia was ready to be revealed. Now watch this. In 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 5, Christ was ready, same Greek word, hetoimos, to judge the living and the dead. He was not only morally prepared, he was temporally ready, and I'll drive that point home momentarily. Now watch this. Verse 7, the end of all things has drawn near. He uses the perfect tense of the Greek, and it means something that was once not near has now drawn near, and it stands as near. And that's temporal nearness. Now watch this. In verse 17, Peter said, the time has come for the judgment. Now let me break this down just a little bit. In the Greek, the definite article appears before time. You know, all translations do not render that, but the definite article is there. The Greek word that is used there is kairos. By the way, I inadvertently stated that in Galatians chapter 4 and verse 4, Paul uses the Greek word kairos. My good friend Gerald Davis corrected me on that, and you know, even as I said it, I thought, I'm not really sure about that. No, it's the Greek word chronos. But number one, I appreciate the correction by my friend. But number two, here in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 17, it is definite article the, chiron, divinely appointed time. So it is the time has come. The divinely appointed time has arrived for the judgment. Not simply judgment. The definite article is in the Greek. It is the judgment. Well, this is what's known as an anaphoric article. The anaphoric article is used when a writer or a speaker has introduced a subject previously, and now he's using the definite article to refer back to that subject. So the question is, where in the context had the subject of judgment been used? Verse 5, Jesus was ready to judge the living and the dead. Well, that's the resurrection. That means in 1 Peter chapter 4 and verse 17, Peter is affirming through the inspiration of the Holy Spirit, the divinely appointed time has come for the judgment. What judgment, Peter? The judgment of the living and the dead. Folks, words could not be clearer. They could not be more explicit or more emphatic. Throughout the entire book of 1 Peter, Peter affirmed the nearness, not the delay, not the postponement, not the vagueness, not the elastic time, the genuine imminence of the resurrection and the day of the Lord. But Brock Hollett would have us to believe that in 2 Peter chapter 3, Peter is going, folks, look, I know I said it was at hand. I know I said the time had arrived, but you got to understand, I didn't mean a word of it. The words don't really mean that. Well, they do, but they don't. You see, it doesn't make good nonsense. It destroys the meaning of language. To attempt to use 2 Peter chapter 3 verse 8, one day is with the Lord, as 1,000 years, 1,000 years as a day. Number one, completely distorts the meaning of Psalms chapter 90, which was an affirmation of the faithfulness of God to keep His promises on time. It was not a statement, God doesn't tell time like we do. No, it's not what it was. Secondly, it turns Peter's own time words on their heads, and it has him saying in 2 Peter chapter 3, you know what? God doesn't tell time like us. We don't really know what time statements mean. And yet in his first epistle, he had said over and over and over again, Christ was ready to appear. The time had come. The time had arrived. Are we supposed to believe the Bible is that self-contradictory? That on the one hand, they're supposed to take assurance in the nearness, the imminence of the coming of the Lord. On the other hand, they're supposed to say, well, imminent, but not really. As I've said before, and with all due respect, That doesn't even make good nonsense. Now, in our very next, what do I do with that? In our very next, well, I had it right here. In our very next video, in examining Brock Hollett's book, I don't know what I did with that. My office goblins ate it. Anyway, in our very next video, I'm going to be sharing with you another argument that Brock Hollett spent some time on. After all, Peter said, the day of the Lord will come as a thief in the night. And that means it would come unexpectedly, without any warning. No one knows when it's coming. And the book I was looking for here on my desk, which I have no clue what I did with, that's really weird, is He Came as a Thief. Go to my website, donkpreston.com, bibleprophecy.com, and you can order that book. I'm sorry I can't offer free shipping on that, all right? But order the book, He Came as a Thief. If you have that prior to our examination, you'll see how incredibly weak, how incredibly misplaced, how terribly abusive of context Brock Hollett's appeal to that truly is. For today, I hope you can see Brock Hollett's attempt to use 2 Peter chapter 3 and verse 8 as a negation of the time statements is totally misguided. It denies the faithfulness of God. It denies Peter's own statements about the genuine, objective imminence that the time had come 2,000 years ago. All right, thanks so much for joining me for this morning's Morning Musings. Hope you have a fantastic weekend. Please be safe. Hope to see you on Monday.